Hello and welcome everyone to another podcast of Brace Yourself. I'm Matt Brace. Today we are going to talk. I'm going to talk about it. We aren't. You're going to hopefully listen. Today's podcast, I just use the terms or the words liberty and freedom. When I started this a couple months ago, again, my kids had insisted that I do a podcast, and didn't really know why, other than that's what their generation and I guess others are doing. Didn't know what I was going to talk about, thought about not making anything political and avoiding all these topics that basically I wrestle with every day. And in contemplating content for this particular podcast, what came to mind were the words liberty and freedom. Again, not thinking that in 1992, when I graduated with a degree in political science, did I ever think in a million years that I would be using this degree ever, let alone on a day-to-day basis. So, but what I discovered over the last few weeks is that, I thought, well, avoid this, avoid that. And basically listening to my heart, as I was trying to figure out what the content was. So I read the news all the time, right? Probably all day, much to my wife's chagrin. Um, and we get bombarded with news from every angle, and in fact, angles that I never thought existed. But with the advent of the internet, we get things flying at us all the time. Last week we didn't have a podcast because my family and I had great news. The news that our third addition to third addition to my oldest son's family, little Lola. So we have a third grandchild, my wife and I. So that was last week, and it was exciting, crazy, all in good ways. Healthy mom, healthy baby, healthy two other grandkids. It was awesome. So my wife and I were at the house where the baby was. So the baby was born in the house, and my daughter-in-law is a stud. And we were there less than 24 hours to see the baby. We had the two other kids with us to show them, let them see their baby sister. It was really exciting. And as my wife and I were driving out of their neighborhood, I thought, first thing that came to mind was, I said to my wife, like, wow, we really need to help them. And she looked at me like, oh, really? And it's like, okay, bad comment. But, they've got a lot going on, 3 kids under the age of 5. And not trying to get cathartic by any means. You're thinking about, again, getting bombarded with information, whether you call it news or not. I thought of my little grandkids, and I was like, man, today, it's crazy. Imagine 10 years from now, these kids are just, they've been born into a fast-paced society that doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon. So the question was, how do we prepare our kids, whether that be my grandkids or actually my 3 sons who are 29, 27, and 22. I had the benefit, as has my wife, that we're Gen Xers. So we were born and raised in a much slower time, where morals and values, they started at home and they were propagated at every other institution, whether that be your church, your school, your workplace. There was an expectation that was inherent to our society, right? And not suggesting it's a total wash at this point, but you definitely see how it has eroded over the years. So I look at this, and a couple of contrasts from, say, Gen X and prior or previous generations. And I saw a couple of things that just in the last day or two. And one of them, I used him the last time, was Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs guy. I love what he does, and his platform being, the trades. But one of the quotes that he used the other day that struck me as outright, odd, meaning I believe the stat, but it's just incumbent upon, I think, me to share it because I have to deal with it every day. And what he said was there are 7 million able-bodied men. So 7 million men from the ages of 18 to 65 that choose not to work. That's crazy, right? They choose not to work. So there's an incentive somewhere to not work, right? A breakdown somewhere from the past that has allowed these people to think, these men to think, it was a men only, it wasn't women, but I'm sure we could grow that number also. But there's something inherently wrong where they think I'll just choose not to, somewhere in the system. The second example I saw on Instagram this morning, and again, much to the chagrin of my wife, but it was a Sesame Street little blurb on a roll or whatever they're called. And it's a little skit or what have you with the Cookie Monster, and I think it's Elmo, or Oscar the Grouch, one or the other, and a trans person. So then I started thinking again about my grandkids, and I'm like, wow. So if they're watching Sesame Street, they're seeing this as normal. That's all they know, right? And they're getting hit with a variety of things as we go. And I'm sure it's unpopular to bring up in certain circles. However, they think it's all right, and I should get over it. I don't think that's the way we ought to do that. At the end of the day, we have to protect our children. My last podcast, I referenced a book that I didn't go too deep into what I got out of that book, but the book was written by Will Durant. It's called Lessons of History. It was written in 1967, Pulitzer Prize, etc. And I brought up the notion, or what was captured in the book, which was false economies. And I didn't go beyond that. So false economies get created. And basically throughout history, Mr. Durant came back and said, every time that a false economy is created, it gets corrected at the same rate that it was created, right? So if you, in our contemporary world, you'd think of like, hey, let's just not keep score. So we breed people that think everybody's a winner. We're all the same. Well, on a lot of levels, yes, we are. On certain other levels, we're not, right? And so the other part of that book that I didn't bring up was the other component of survival of the fittest, or the most adaptive, really, which I think is more pertinent. So how do we do that, right? So we have to adapt, and without compromising our priorities. Strong families make for strong institutions. Strong institutions make for a strong country. Another book worth mentioning, and I'm going to read from this book because I think it's incredible. I'm going to geek out on my poli-sci here, but it's pretty amazing. This book is called Naked Communism. And it was written by Cleon Skousen. So this book was written in 1957, and it was presented to Congress in 1963. So if you take yourself back to what was going on in the late 50s and the early 60s, we were fighting communism. We were fighting communism in Vietnam. We were fighting communism in Korea. We had the Cold War going on between us and Russia and China. So the book is basically, they were able to get KGB folks back in the pre-1957 and defected and help Mr. Skousen with this book. And I've read it, a couple of times, and but there's an excerpt of this that's really, I think, pertinent. And it's the 45 steps that communist Russia is taking. Again, this is in 1957 to destabilize America. Now, I'm not going to read all 45. I would encourage you to get the book. It's an awesome book if you're into history and sociology and economies, etc. But this one is germane to the spread of communism in 1957. So alarming that they waited, 6 years before we presented it to Congress. So here's a couple of excerpts on those 45 steps. This is going to ring so true to everyone that's listening. And I'll start with, we're going to get step 12, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. Do away with loyalty oaths, all of them. Pledge of Allegiance. Do away with all those. Continue giving Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Use technical decisions of the court to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. In other words, make us stupid or dumber. Get control of teachers' associations, teachers' unions. Put the party line in the textbooks. Gain control of all student newspapers. Use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. Step 20. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policy-making positions. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. Control art critics and directors of art museums. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them, quote, censorship, and a violation of free speech and free press. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, promiscuity as, quote, normal, natural, and healthy. Infiltrate the churches, replace revealed religion with, quote, social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a, quote, religious crutch. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, and a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. Discredit the American Founding Fathers. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the, quote, big picture. Support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture, education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. I'm looking at another one here. Discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Infiltrate and gain control of more unions. Infiltrate and gain control of big business. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. To not dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Number 41, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use, quote, united force, end quote, to solve economic, political, or social problems. Internationalize the Panama Canal. And finally, repeal the Connolly Reservation so the U.S. cannot prevent the World Court from seizing jurisdiction over domestic problems. Give the World Court jurisdiction over nations and individuals alike. Besides my one faux pas in pronouncing degeneracy, if those points that I read don't ring true with you, meaning relate those to today, you've seen all this in the last four years for sure. And this has been kicked off before the last president. This was kicked off way before. So we're in it, folks. I mean, there's no two ways around it or about it. We're in it. So this is happening right now. And again, not trying to make everything political, but I don't know how you can't. This is a huge wake-up call for us. Consider that this book was written in 1957. Here we sit, and what I read to you is happening to us as we speak. It's a wake-up call for sure. So if you want to get it again, it's Naked Communism. It's great. So we all think, and I thought this too, when November, the fight for America, as it was termed by the Republicans, right leading up to the election in November, the fight didn't end. In fact, I would argue that the fight began January. It began when the inauguration of January. That's when the fight started. So we're at the very beginning of the fight, and we've seen it, and on the news, we've seen the other side of it, which is saying, no, this is not what's going on. Use your compass, your moral compass. We have a debt crisis right now that a lot of, I think people just blow it off like, I've heard about this. We see it every so many months. We're going to run out of funding to keep the government going. And then it gets down to the hour before, the day before, and somehow, some way, miraculously gets passed. But we have a full-on debt crisis. It's a major issue, one that will be more devastating than anything we've ever seen, for sure. Or for that matter, what our almost 250-year-old country has ever experienced. I would say that the other crisis that is probably begets the other one, but certainly the moral and the values. We have a crisis with our morality and values, for sure. And I don't think that, the media helps. I'm not fingering anyone in particular, but it's like, man, they're just adding gas to the fire. It sells, right? So how do we change all this? I think when I listen and read about the curriculum and one of those steps that the Russians had put forth about, basically dumbing down the curriculum, mission accomplished. We have done that. Certain states have said, hey, you don't need English and math for a high school diploma. Western states. So imagine opening up a business in, I think it's Oregon or Washington.